So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Julie Bolduc, pronouns are she, her, and I work in the Career Connections Center, and I'm the Director of Career Operations and Student Employment. And Shay, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shay Hopley. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Academic Success Manager in the Office for Academic Support, which is part of the Dean of the College office. And I guess why I'm here, because Julie makes a whole lot of sense for why she's here, is just that I have a good history of employing students and really enjoy thinking about how we make that process accessible for our students.
Thanks, Shay. And yes, thank you so much because you've laid a lot of this groundwork. So I owe major props to you for really getting this going.
You.
So we are here to talk about why inclusive hiring practices are important. And student employment is a vital career building experience for our students. And I'm really working to help them understand that it's not just a paycheck and money in their pocket. They're actually learning skills like time management, communication, and then anything above and beyond that might be specific to a job, like Excel skills or design skills. And many students from marginalized populations don't come to Clark with a strong resume. And I think a lot of faculty and staff, they look at the resumes and they do look for experience, but we're really encouraging everyone to try to look at more of the aptitude that a student has, maybe than what their specific work experience is. And that said, we completely understand that certain jobs you need excellent skills in certain things and moderate skills in others, but we're really just encouraging everyone to kind of think beyond the resume and think about on-campus jobs as a really good start for a student. In a lot of cases, students with marginalized backgrounds, they don't have the connections that other students have. A lot of students, their parents might know someone who owns a business or who manages a business and they get a job that way. But students from lower income backgrounds, they don't have that kind of access that a lot of other students have. They might need to stay home to take care of their older relatives or their younger relatives. So it's good to just keep those barriers in mind, because inclusive hiring practices can really break down barriers. And diverse teams are high performing teams. So I encourage everyone to think about that too. Students from different backgrounds will have different feedback for you and about the work that you do or the students that you interact with. And that can be really, really valuable. In posting positions on campus, the goal is to equalize the opportunity landscape. And that's why we have all positions posted on Handshake. And we really love Handshake because it's a one-stop shopping for a lot of students. They can see career events in the portal. They can see some events from other departments. They can look for on-campus jobs, and they can also look for internships and full-time jobs. So we ask everyone to post jobs on Handshake so that all students have access to knowing what jobs are available on campus. So I encourage everyone to avoid asking colleagues for names for recommended students to work with. Please don't offer jobs to students you already know, because again, we want all students to have the same opportunities. So what we typically ask is that all positions are posted for at least 3 business days so that students have a chance to see the job and apply. As far as job descriptions go, I touched on this in the introduction, but we encourage everyone to consider requirements intentionally. What is actually required for the job? Could the word required be replaced with an aptitude for? A lot of students, especially first-year students, end up writing to me and Kate Benoit, our on-campus career advisor for job searches on campus. They'll say, I feel like I'm not qualified for any of these jobs. Where can I work? So kind of opening up those job descriptions to make them more welcoming for students who maybe don't have the perfect work experience or excellent skills. They might have kind of starter skills where they're trainable. They have an aptitude to learn. And adding will train where possible really helps students feel more welcome. You know, a lot of us just kind of take that for granted. We all do spend a lot of time training students. So putting that in the job description lets students know, okay, maybe I don't have all the requirements, but I will get the training for what I need. Using inclusive language in the job descriptions and clear and accessible language in the job descriptions also helps. So trying to avoid acronyms because students aren't necessarily familiar with what MSGIS means and things like that. It's helpful for students. Again, it makes everything seem more accessible. And avoid using gender-coded words and technical jargon. There's actually, I'll send you this PowerPoint afterward, but there's a great gender coding tool that you can put job description language into, and they'll let you know what are typical masculine sounding terms, you know, like assertive and things like that, typical feminine sounding terms, and just avoiding that sort of thing is really, really helpful. When you ask for extra materials like writing sample or ideas for social media campaigns, please make sure you really need those materials, because you need to be mindful. We encourage everyone to be mindful of how much work you're asking students to put into their application materials. And if you do ask for anything extra, you can just explain why. You know, hopefully you could even, instead of saying a writing sample about this specific thing, you could just say a writing sample is needed to evaluate skills for this job in marketing communications or something like that. Because again, a lot of students, they have a lot of different responsibilities, maybe at home, or you know, they have a different job that might not be the best career building job, but they really want to experience the campus community, faculty and staff and students. It's such a great tool for students to really learn about their own job preferences and what makes them happy in their work, and explore what they're interested in. Cindy, who's in this session, has shared with me that I think at least 17 students over the years have either worked for the library after graduation or went into library science. So these opportunities are just really exciting, really valuable. And where possible, avoid using recommendations as part of your materials, because this has to do with the background that students are coming from. They might not have a lot of work experience, or they might not have experience in specific jobs that give them powerful recommendations. So again, just kind of thinking broadly about what the student themselves offer is really important. And Shay, would you like to talk about that?
So Julie's done a great job of sort of talking about the posting process and getting applicants, but then you have to evaluate those applicants. And so there's a lot of ways in which being inclusive in your sort of selection and in your evaluation can help students get opportunities that they might have been screened out for. So when you first start thinking about hiring, I think it is really important to have some time for self-reflection or reflection among your team that is doing this evaluation. You know, we all have unconscious biases or even conscious biases. And so being self-aware of those things, I think, is really important. Eliminating bias also ensures that more students who hold marginalized identities are able to go further in those hiring processes. And those biases, you know, can look different ways. I think about, I used to hire for resident assistants. That was one of the areas that I did a lot of hiring for. And, you know, even it's just thinking about a bias of what we think of when we think of a resident assistant. We had some older students that we didn't think of as residential students. And so we had to sort of examine that ageism. We had to examine that bias and go, no, if the students applied for this, they know that they have to live in the halls and things like that. So trusting our applicants and things like that. I think it's also important where you can to have multiple people looking over materials. And, sometimes your process doesn't allow for that, but it just sort of ensures that one person's biases don't dictate the selection process. Whether you can make the screening process more of a blind screening process because it removes some of that identifying information, or if you can have multiple people looking at things, I think it just helps to increase the likelihood that you have a less biased process. Yeah. So when screening those materials, I think it's important to also think through, being kind when materials are late, and equity-minded when materials are late. Unexpected issues arise for everyone, but definitely for students who have, more barriers, maybe students who work already off campus, or they take care of family members. Their ability to meet a deadline might be impacted by other people. Similarly, students who maybe have a chronic illness, a flare-up might consume time that they thought was going to be available. And so those sorts of things, I think we've seen with COVID, even unexpected technology issues can really change your ability to get something in on time. So I think when we can accommodate folks who are late, that we try and offer that grace and that understanding. I additionally think that it's really important to make your evaluation criteria as clear as possible for your readers, the folks who are evaluating it, just because it helps to eliminate some of those personal biases and make the evaluation more consistent between folks reading things. I think when I first started sort of screening materials, again, for that RA process, it was a lot of materials. We had about 200 students that would apply for these positions, and it would be 12 of us looking at the materials, and our lists would look really different. And so having a conversation and making really clear evaluation criteria helped us to become more consistent and to provide applicants better feedback because we had more consistent criteria and could speak to things that were lacking. Additionally, I think focusing on the ideas and the content is rather than sort of the grammatical errors or the mechanics of the materials is really important because folks have had different access to education. Folks might not be native English speakers or might speak a different dialect of English. And so unless the grammar and the mechanics are really vital to the position you're hiring for, I think focusing on the ideas and the content communicated helps provide access to students who might not, have the perfect grammar or things like that. And again, I think it's something that can be really trainable. And so I think it's something that we can oftentimes give more grace in. And then additionally, just be flexible about the format of the materials that you're looking at. Some folks might not have office programs, and so they might not be able to give you a Word document, but they can give you a PDF or they can give you a Google Doc or things like that. And so if you need materials in a specific format so you can read them, that's understandable, but just be clear about those requirements so that students can get you the right materials and have time to get access to the technologies that allow them to give you that material. And then hopefully after you review the materials, you can interview candidates. And so the interview process is another process where bias can enter in, and being more inclusive allows us to get more candidates and be able to get a really rich sort of pool of folks. So there's a lot of tips that I have for the interview process. I really love interviewing, so that's why I have so many. I think making your process clear for candidates is one really good step. Students with anxiety or students with disabilities or just, with the other things going on might feel particularly nervous about the unknowns of heading into an interview. And so if you make your process clear and provide good instructions, students can visualize that and feel confident heading into a situation. I also think oftentimes, even myself, when I have really clear instructions for what an interview is going to look like, that helps me to feel more prepared and to present my best self in that space. And so we want that opportunity for all our students. Additionally, you want to make sure that your interview is accessible to all of your candidates. So could a wheelchair user access your interviewing space? Do the chairs that you have fit all body sizes? Are candidates allowed to call into an interview if they're maybe not on campus on that day? Or if they don't have the technology, can they call on the phone instead of using Zoom? Additionally, this is something that I think came up more during COVID and might come up a little less as we're moving more and more on campus, but sometimes our students last year were in different time zones. And so were the times that you were offering accessible to all students? Were you flexible if they weren't accessible to that particular time zone? Yeah, and so you just never know exactly what your candidates need. So I think additionally asking your candidates if there's any accommodations that they need to fully participate in the interview can be another way to make sure that it's accessible, just giving them that opportunity. Additionally, we want to check that our questions don't have bias in them. And so really, we want to make sure that our questions are clear, they're understandable, and when possible, they're asking for some concrete answers. Students with disabilities or students who are non-native English speakers, they need questions that are asked concretely in order to give their most effective answer. And it's not that they don't have the skills or the core values that you're looking for a student worker to have when you ask, more complicated questions. It just might be that it's a little harder for them to understand what you're asking. And so being as clear and concrete as possible can be very helpful. The next bit is about just making sure that you aren't using ideas like fit or more subjective criteria to evaluate your interviewees. Oftentimes, professionalism and fit really are informed by whiteness, informed by heteronormativity, informed by cisgenderism, all of these sort of big systems. And so thinking about, oh, well, they're not the right fit, that can be a really biased assumption. I'll use my own, example of thinking of that candidate who was older than what I was expecting for a resident assistant. That was a bias about what fit my criteria, and it wasn't something that should be part of a score or eliminate a candidate from a process. Additionally, if you can rubric and score your candidates as soon as possible, it can really help to help eliminate some of the bias and make more consistent criteria. I'm going to show in another slide a sample of an interviewing rubric. I think oftentimes folks are used to seeing a rubric when we're looking at the materials, but sometimes it can be hard to think of rubricing for answering an interview question because there can be so many answers to an interview question, but rubrics can really help with that sort of inter-rater bias and inconsistency. Take good notes is another piece of that. So if you can't score right away or things like that, taking notes in the moment will definitely help because memory can be failable. You can just remember somebody that you connected with well, rather than remembering exactly what their answers were. And so making sure you have good notes of their answers is very helpful. I also think it's good to think about what formats you can use for interviewing. Traditional interview formats, again, are something that's normed in dominant culture. And so it can make them intimidating or inaccessible for students with marginalized identities. And so maybe it's a group process or an activity or something that's project-based. Maybe your interview could be more of a tour and a shorter interview at the end to help make your space feel more welcoming and make it feel more reciprocal to students. And I'm sure you all, have plenty of cool ideas how you could maybe change things up just a little bit to make it more accessible. And then when giving an interview, try and keep your interview structured as possible. When interviews are unstructured, it does mean that candidates often get asked different questions and they don't get the same opportunity to speak to their experiences. And so I definitely think it's okay to ask a follow-up question of like, oh, they didn't exactly answer the full question, or you wanted them to explain something. But we want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to answer the questions. And so if you didn't ask one candidate and maybe they have a great answer, you're sort of losing out on hearing about that experience. So on this slide, I can tell it's very small. So I want to make it easier for folks to see it. And so I'm just going to send you the Google Doc if you want to look at it more in depth. But this is just an example of rubricing out answers for questions. And this was particularly helpful, again, when I was part of the selection committee for our resident assistant staff, that we had over 12 folks interviewing different candidates. And we were often finding that we were rating answers really differently. And so we had to take the time to think about, what were we looking for and what is a good answer? And so we made not only sort of some guidelines of what an answer could be like, because there's a wide variety of ways that students can answer, but we had some examples, because sometimes having an example could help folks to think about like, oh, okay, I wasn't necessarily thinking about, in this case, it needs to be both multitasking and prioritization that I hear about. And so having some examples would help folks. Yeah, but this takes a good deal of time ahead of time to be able to do that with a whole team. And so sometimes you don't have the opportunity to do this, but as often as you can, I think it can be really helpful. And then once you've interviewed them, hopefully you get to pick some amazing students. So selection, once again, another place where being inclusive can allow you to have awesome candidates and create your strongest team. So ultimately, we want you, when possible, to eliminate situations or limit situations where just one individual is making the decision. Because again, it just means that one person's preferences, or biases could be making the ultimate decision. And so when we have more people, that means more perspectives are represented and folks get more opportunities. Additionally, we want to be able to articulate why we're hiring the folks that we're hiring and why we're not choosing the folks that we're not choosing. And so when we are thinking about, who we're employing, we want to be able to provide folks with feedback for why we made the selection decisions that we made. Recently, I was hiring for graduate assistants, and that was a really helpful part of the process for a lot of the students that I had, is that I offered to give them the rationale for why they weren't selected. And so we had a short conversation. The students that chose it, I'm not going to, automatically throw feedback at them if they didn't want it, but the students that asked to, I met with them and we just talked it through of, hey, this was my process for selecting folks. Here's the areas where I thought it could be improved, and sort of how you might be able to do this for your next job application. I think it's also important to, again, as I talked about before, think about the concept of fit. You want to interrogate that desire to hire someone who you feel affinity for, or that you feel is just the perfect fit, but you don't have good ways to articulate why that is. That you're not able to say, oh, I think they're a good fit because of these skills that I was assessing them on. It's just a good fit because you like their personality, or, things like that. When you do ultimately get to offer students a position, which is an exciting thing, and oftentimes they're really excited to answer right away and tell you, yes, I'd love that position. Don't assume that they automatically will accept. Make sure that you give them time to consider the offer and allow them to decide if they want to accept the position. Students may be looking at multiple options. And so we ultimately want folks to make the best decision. They might have multiple offers at a time, or be looking at an internship or a student employment opportunity. And so just make sure you build in a little bit of time in that process. And then finally, communicate in a timely manner. I think students sometimes can feel like they hear nothing back. And so once you know who you've hired, be sure to communicate to students that the process has ended and that you've gone with somebody else, or, things like that.
I'd love to chime in really quickly if I can, Shay, about communicating with students. I agree. It goes a long way to having students feel happier about their campus experience, because for first years or transfer students, or this year, our new Becker students, master students who are new to campus, applying for jobs is one of their first campus experiences. And it's really easy to message applicants and handshake. I have documentation on the website, but I'm on Teams throughout the day, and I'll continue to do that when we're all back on campus. So feel free to just message me and say, hey, can you just walk me through it? I'd be more than happy to do it, because again, I think it really goes a long way to the whole campus experience for students.
Yeah. No one likes being ghosted by a process. I think we've experienced that in our own job searches. Additionally, when we think about student employment, we're really thinking about, we want as many students as possible to have the opportunity to experience on-campus student employment. And so student employment has a correlation with retention, which is really important. We want to make sure that our students are having a good experience. And usually that connection to campus, that connection with the supervisor, the department, or even their peers that they're working with, can be a really strong bond to the campus community and really improve their campus experience. And so as we're trying to retain our students and thinking intentionally about that, having more students employed definitely helps with that effort. And I'll pass this back to Julie to talk about international students, because she's had some really great students sort of give some feedback, and they have good things to say.
Right. So international students, they need, in most cases, to apply for a social security number when they come to take classes at Clark. And it's kind of a chicken and egg situation where they can't get a social security number until they have a job offer. But we've heard that a lot of faculty and staff are in such a rush to hire students that they're not really willing to wait that out, that process out. So I just want to clarify, excuse me, that students can work as long as they have applied for a social security number and supplied their onboarding documents. So the clarification is that they cannot be paid until they've submitted their social security number via a secure Dropbox to the appropriate office. For undergraduates, it's Office of Financial Assistance. For graduate students, it's the payroll office. But I encourage everyone to not think of it as the barrier that they typically think of it as. So if a student has applied for a social security number, then they can get one within hopefully 2 to 4 weeks. Hopefully the backlog from the pandemic, with a lot of staff working remotely, it won't be as significant this year, but students can apply for a social security number and provide, the fax confirmation that it's been applied for to the appropriate office, and then they're approved to work. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time. Next, we will move on to onboarding. So once you've hired a student, making them feel as welcome as possible goes a long way. And here is some suggested information to collect about the student. What is their preferred name? What are their preferred pronouns? Their contact information, their major or program, year in school, course schedule, possibly emergency contact information, dietary preferences, depending what the job entails, and any accommodations that they need to successfully work in your office. And do they want to share anything else about information about themselves? Maybe a student might be open to feeling a little more anxious than the typical student. Maybe they don't want to share it, but inviting that information will help them feel more welcome in your office. Inclusive workplaces. So Shay and I definitely realize that we all only have so much control over our workspaces, the building itself, and we're just encouraging everyone to just try to be sensitive to any possible barriers that students may have and try to address it as much as possible. So is your space representative of all kinds of students and people? Is your space accessible for all abilities? Does your office have a statement on D&I? Do your office policies and expectations have differential impacts on students based on their identity? So an example of this is that, what we consider maybe a proper office wardrobe is really a sign of privilege. Some students don't have the money to have the latest fashions or a large wardrobe, and just considering that and talking things through with the student about what's acceptable in the office and what's not. Just have a conversation about it. I'm guilty of noticing what students wear to our career fairs, and was that really a good idea? But the training that I've gotten on diversity and inclusion has really made me think of clothing being a sign of privilege. So again, I know it's a lot to remember. No one can do this perfectly, but just trying goes a long way. Some more general onboarding tips. Welcome students to the office, and in advance, try to set up any permissions they may need in certain platforms that you use or printers or things like that. If students need card or key access, it just makes everything go a little bit more smoothly, as much as you can anticipate that sort of thing before they start. Again, if they need accommodations, try to consider those. And methods of training, it's a good idea to think about different types of training, a variety of training, whether it's readings or videos or kind of role plays, particularly for like a front desk position. Maybe you just want to run through some of the frequently asked questions so they can just become familiar with the job. Some students, are more visual, some aren't. So just trying to, again, have a conversation about what works for them is really, really helpful. Clearly communicating is an essential strategy to working with students or even your fellow colleagues. As much as you can communicate the training schedule to students in advance, communicating how the first day will look will just kind of help ease anxieties. And again, just open conversations, especially this fall. I think all of us have tons of mixed feelings about coming back into the office. I talked with a colleague yesterday and we just said, wow, it's going to be weird to sit in the room with non-family members. So just acknowledging that, I think, kind of eases anxiety in a lot of us. So colleagues and students, let's just talk about how it might be a little awkward, or, if you want to wear a mask, go ahead and wear a mask. We want everyone to feel comfortable. Please also provide students general student employment resources. Please encourage them to read the handbook. It walks through all the policies, how to submit timesheets, what the pay periods are, and it also coaches them on proper kind of work etiquette about communicating with your supervisor about when you can and can't work. If there are issues with your supervisor, coaching them on how to kind of talk things out. And we also have an onboarding checklist that I can email everybody with this PowerPoint at the end. And this goes over all the things that we've talked about. A little bit more about training. If you should compensate students for their training time because they are working. And please have a conversation with student workers about your expectations. Again, open conversations. If my door is closed, please knock, or please just come back. All those things tend to be different depending what time of day it is or who the person is. So kind of think about those things and maybe create your own checklist of just kind of going over what the student needs to know to work successfully with you. Please acquaint students with the office space and tools they'll use. Introduce students to your fellow colleagues and student staff, because again, you want to try to be as welcoming as possible. And bring a cultural and critical lens to all the training topics that you cover. Workplace cultures are hard to navigate for students who don't have a lot of experience. So I've often found that just providing prompt, gentle feedback is a really successful strategy. Otherwise, the tension kind of builds if your expectations are here and the student doesn't know that. So early feedback, frequent feedback is really helpful. And encourage the student to give you feedback, because we all have different expectations. I worked at kind of a bed and bath type store once, and my supervisor said, "You never have ideas about end caps." I thought, that's they want my feedback on that. So again, it's just that kind of disconnect between expectations and reality sometimes. Thinking of different kinds of learners when structuring your trainings, we touched upon this. And think about students' other obligations. Are they on a team? Do they have a different campus job? Do they have night classes? Just trying to accommodate the students as much as possible is really helpful. Thank you very much. That was a lot of information, we know. Does anyone have any questions or feedback? Okay.
I just think it was super helpful. A lot of things that people don't necessarily think about, but I feel like we've all been guilty of it at some point. So just really great reminders to put the forethought when we're hiring people. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback. And again, we know not everyone's perfect, but just trying to get there is what's important. So we really appreciate all of you being here and listening in, and it was nice to see you all too.
Thanks, Julie.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thank you.